Welcome everybody to everything there is to know about turning your personal project into a public project, or why production studio should be a required course, because it really should be, and is not, and that's bad. So let's get started with an overview of some basic IGM curriculum. Your GDAPSs, your 202s, all those required courses that first years just love. You love monogame? We know you love monogame. So some good things about the core curriculum of game dev stuff is you get a lot of the basics. I mean, that can be good and bad depending on your skill level. If you're coming in with a lot of coding experience, GDAPS isn't going to do a lot for you, but at that point you can probably skip it depending on the classes you've taken in high school. But you'll learn a lot of best practice, especially for like C# and C++, which you might not learn through like informal schooling or maybe even from high school classes. You also get to know the nitty gritty of like game development stuff. Like monogame, the reason they teach you monogame is because you're at the root level of like engine stuff. There's no interface to help you. You have to do everything by hand, which is a blessing and a curse, mostly a curse. So there's also a lot of really unfun stuff with like basic IGM curriculum. Web dev. Who here wants to do web dev for a living? Probably not many people. And like the reason they do that is because the awful truth is that not everybody can be a game designer just with the amount of jobs out there. So they're like, well, we have to teach them something, but it's not very useful if you want to make games. You also don't really get to know about a lot of like long-term project workflows that are like industry standard. Everything is very short class projects that you finish within the semester and then you don't ever worry about ever again or even look at. And then those projects are like really hard to put into your portfolio because everyone else made the same kind of project and you can only put so much of your own spin on that without just making an entirely new thing. Cough, cough, uprooted. So, speaking of industry standard workflows, how many people here who've only taken like the basic, or maybe some first years are here? Do any of these ring a bell to you? Stuff like Perforce, Trello, Jira, and then some stuff like Agile. Because if it doesn't yet, it will, especially if you get a game dev job, because all this stuff is very, very important. I also cannot see the chat. Let me pop the chat out here. What the? It did not pop the chat out. There we go. Why is Notion not on here? Good question.
Wow, you guys know more?
Yeah, wow. People here knowing things I've never heard of.
They told me, Chris Cascioli told me about Hack and Plan when I took GDAPS, and that's how I kept our group organized.
Yeah, he's a good professor. Interesting. Interesting to hear everyone's tools. But yeah, if you haven't heard these yet, you're going to hear of at least one of them very soon. So how do you get out of not having a lot of cool stuff to work on in your classes? These three programs is how. You have Production Studio, you have Independent Studies, and you have Magic's Maker program. So let's go ahead and get into Production Studio.
Hello, I am here. So Production Studio is a really fun class. I highly recommend that you take it. It's a great excuse to work on a project. You might spend a lot of time in the semester hearing the words, hey, you need a personal project. And you're like, wait, in order to have a personal project, you need time. And you realize you don't get a lot of time. So the best solution, in my opinion, is to either do the Maker, the Maker program, which Eddie will talk about later, or Production Studio. So you can get like class credit for working on your own personal project. I use that class to work on Uprooted now, and it's really great. I have a professor revise the project while I work, so it helps formalize my production process. It makes it more presentable and organizes the project in a really nice way in case I want to publish in the future. So if we're going to talk about the flow of production studio, it starts with a pitch. So you pitch your game. Usually it's like a one-liner that describes your game, an elevator pitch. And then the class will vote on what games they're interested in. And whatever games are the most interesting, they'll usually get a team behind them. Or sometimes if you already have team members set and you don't want to add additional people, the professor will greenlight your project and say, hey, yeah, you can work on this for our class. The professor doesn't really want you to bring on projects that are like rip-offs of other projects. Like you need to come in with an original idea. Don't come in like, hey, I want to remake this exact game from scratch. We've had somebody come in before and try to pitch doing a full remake of a game, and no, you gotta have your own original spin on it.
You can try making it in Scratch, maybe. That might be something new.
Eric, you have a question?
Yeah. What if I wanted to like? So if I had like something that's in the similar genre, and I just do like a little spin, it would still work for that class.
Yeah. So you just can't like remake an entire intellectual property.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
I can't make Mario.
And yeah, in production studio, you don't have to come in with a game. You could also come in with multimedia projects. So Newbie Interactive Design Studios could come in with like apps and stuff that they're interested in developing those. The professor will have you make a whole timeline, and we could jump forward just so they can see an example. You'll set out your milestones for each week. So here's an example of actually uprooted Trello, and we have to define what our goals are each week and meet those objectives ideally. Go back.
Oh.
So for production studio, you basically get a 4 to 5 week sprint. You work on your game, you do weekly check-ins with the professor, you work on a design, or you work on a formal update doc that you have to submit every week as well. Later on, you're gonna be expected to do playtesting during those milestones. And eventually, once you hit those three, that milestone week, and there's 3 milestone weeks, you'll do a formal doc that's talking about your process over the last few weeks, and then you'll go and drop a playable build of your game. You'll record yourself covering your game as well. So you'll play your game, that way the professor could see anything that might not be covered in your presentation later on or in your documentation. So the professor can visibly see your progress on the side. And then you'll also present to the class what you've done with a slideshow. And also, there's peer evals. Remember to do the peer evals, otherwise you'll be working on a game dev club presentation, and in the middle you'll say, oh fudge, I didn't do the peer evals. This isn't a true story. I'm fine.
It didn't happen last night.
Nope.
So that's enough about production studio.
I didn't know Samus is working on Uprooted.
Huh?
I didn't know Samus is working on Uprooted.
But yeah. Oh, Carter, you got a question?
Yeah, so who owns this project? If you work on it in the class, does RIT own a portion of it, or is it still completely yours?
It's still completely yours. And as for student projects, if you really plan on running with the project for production, I highly suggest you look into getting contracts set up. So I had to do that with Uprooted. It feels corporate and it's not fun to do, but it's very necessary to make sure rights are in line if you want to be pitching and publishing in the future.
Oh, that reminds me, I need to do a contract for a new concept artist.
Also, Carter, or anybody, I can drop a link in the chat about a good resource for contract templates that have been done, I think, by lawyers and stuff that you can customize for your project for free. So if somebody reminds me after the meeting, I will link that because that's what we used for Uprooted.
Yeah, and it's like specifically for game dev stuff. So it's got you covered there. It's not just like generic contracts. It's like, these are contract templates for game designers.
And it's also for creative properties in general. It's not, it could be for apps too, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So, independent studies. What if you want to study a specific topic? You don't necessarily have a project in mind. but there's something you want to learn about related to like development, and there's not a class for it. For example, virtual reality, experimental mechanics, there's no class for learning about that. But what if you could make your own? You can. It's called independent studies. Basically, what you do is you get a professor to sign off on, heading the independent study, and you get together, you form a plan for the whole semester, like a week by week, sort of like, this is what we're doing this week. This is what's happening next week. There are some milestones involved with like midterm reviews and deliverables and stuff. It's pretty flexible, and it probably depends on who the professor is and what the topic is, what those milestones are, and what the final deliverable is. We did an independent study on virtual reality with Ian Schreiber a couple semesters ago in fall of 2020. And basically the way that worked is every week we made a bunch of different prototypes for VR mechanics, and then we presented them to Ian, and we just did that week after week. And our final deliverable was a website that just showed everything we made over the semester. It was basically like experimental mechanics, like seeing what works and what doesn't in VR. Like we did all sorts of crazy stuff. Like, what if the cameras, your two eye cameras were in your hands instead of your head? So like your right hand was your right eye, your left hand was your left eye. And that was vomit inducing. Don't do that. Don't make a game that does that. And don't make a game where you have to lean to move, like you're on a skateboard. I tried that. That was more vomit inducing.
I should have gave you my skateboard for that.
No, but like, here's some examples of what we did in that class. So like, here's me just doing some Metroid stuff in VR. That is so unsatisfying looking back at it. I would change those blocks, do something different. But basically, like this was actually several different mechanics just that I built off of for a week or two. I was like, okay, first I'll make the arm cannon. You have to hold your hand up like Samus. Then I'll make the, hitting the projectiles back. And then I'll make the grapple beam. And that was basically it. And like, I'll make an enemy that shoots the projectile at you. You can do the tennis, the classic Nintendo boss tennis thing with it. And maybe what if you could grapple the cubes? What if you could grapple projectiles? This is something I definitely plan on returning to. This is actually a lot of fun to make. So that's just an example of like, that kind of stuff. There's also this thing where it's like, what if you had an infinite inventory that you could stuff things into, but when you wanted to pull something out of it, it just pulled a random item out of your inventory. And it's like you have infinite pants, basically. That's what this concept was. So, more of like VR cartoon violence, I guess, is what you'd call this. So lots of bananas here. This is just like a short concept of like, okay, how does it feel to pull something out of your back pocket and then just pull a bunch of bananas out? And then I made a vacuum to get rid of it all because it was messy. But yeah, independent studies like are very varied because it depends on the professor and it depends on what you want to study. But the best thing about them is that you can basically just do them with all your friends. You can get your friends and be like, I want to do this class. Let's do this together. And that's what we did for VR, because that was actually Mark of Camera That Bleeds fame, Mark Lapina. He's the one who wanted to do the VR study, and we sort of came on with him when he told us about that. Yeah, Eric?
I had a question. What if you had wanted to like study like a monetization method or like another way of funding a game?
Like monetizing your game, like related to independent studies or just in general?
Yeah, related to independent studies. Can I like test it out in independent studies?
So like a class on like monetization?
Well, the thing I was thinking of, it'll make sense if I explain it. I was thinking, have you heard of blockchain games or whatever?
Yeah.
So I was playing on, like, instead of being a play to earn sort of thing, it could be free to play, but it could be mining things in the background. And so it's like another form of free to play, where you playing directly generates money. I was wondering if I could test that out in this class, if that'd be possible.
Well,
If you wanted to make an independent study on something like that, you would need to get a professor, pitch your idea, and then the professor will sign on if they're interested in overseeing the project with you. So you can pretty much do anything. I know Sam Camarada, I think that's their last name, part of Acetician Labs, or ALA. They did like a whole, I think they ended up making their own major at the same time, but they started taking more game production independent studies and then went and made their own major with that. So that's another way you can look at some of these classes. If you want to specialize in something very specific in game design, but you don't feel like the major is really suiting you, you could go to like the School of Individualized Study and look to see how you can kind of twist the major or make a new major.
yeah, so long story short, professor's approval is what you need for an independent study. So let's get on. Speaking of monetization, it's time to talk about the Magic Makers program. I am currently in this program, and guess what? It's a co-op. It's not a class. If you need co-op credit and you want to work on your game, Magic Makers is where to go. So basically, the format of this is you pitch your game to Magic with you make a submission, you submit it to them, they review it, you get interviewed, like a job interview. You basically have to explain, what your plan is to do with their funding, what your final deliverable would be if you got into the program, and then you would, get into the program and you would spend that semester working on your game, working towards that final deliverable. And I'll go more in depth on like the general format. But something to be wary of with Magic is it is a paid program. You get money from this. But there are two versions of it. There is the prototype version, which is basically for games that are much earlier on in development. So in like, just lower, like way back in the timeline kind of games where it's like, this isn't close to releasing. This is a prototype and we're still prototyping things.
Right. I did the prototype program. Uprooted was very loose. I knew where I wanted to go with it, but it wasn't anywhere close to like me publishing a demo. It had a lot of work to do. So I decided to do the prototype program for Uprooted, for example.
And the prototype program has changed a lot since last fall because there's also the full version, which is the same as the prototype program. They give you more funding. So for the prototype version of Magic, they give you $1,000 for the semester to split amongst your team however you want. And for the full version, you get $10,000. So something to note is that it definitely favors smaller team sizes, like 1 to 3 people, because the more team members you have, the harder it is to find what you want to do with that money, because then it becomes a question of, do we pay everybody? Do we save it and keep it for something important related to the development of the game? Or do we only pay the people who are working on this full time? That kind of thing. And obviously that varies from team to team, who you bring on with you and what you pitch to them. So, here we have some games that have either gone through the prototype program or the full version, or things that are in it right now. Like I'm working on Personalized right now as part of Magic through the co-op, that kind of stuff. So let's see.
Oh, it's Kenny. Oh my
It's
God.
Kenny. Kenny came. Kenny's here.
So for context, how much context can we give them about?
Let's worry about that after the presentation. So
We thought we were in trouble first.
yeah,
but we were
well, let's move on to the general workflow of Magic. So this is a co-op, but there is sort of a structure to it, much like Production Studio. So basically at the start of the semester, you see what all the other projects are, what everyone's working on, and you just get a feel for like who else is in the program with you. Like right now, there are 3 Magic Maker games in the program. And actually, Magic Maker, I should mention, something important about Magic Maker is that it is not just games. It is also like films, multimedia projects. So if you don't have a game, but you have a personal project that you want to pitch to Magic, it doesn't have to be a game. And so you get to see all the other projects at the start. And then every 3 weeks, you actually get to meet with developers from Rockstar, the game development studio, the GTA people, the Red Dead Redemption people. And they basically, they play through a build of your project, or they watch the materials for your project, or whatever else it is related to your project. They go through the materials you give them that week, and then they give you a lot of advice. And it will hurt to hear, especially if you're very early on in production. And it will all be very good advice that you don't want to hear, but will be right. That's just how it is with industry professionals. So it's a very important part of the program, and is something I highly recommend people, if you get into Magic, heed the advice of Rockstar, hang on their every word, because everything they say will most likely be very helpful, because they'll tell you a lot about stuff that industry professionals do that even like in production studio you don't necessarily learn about. Like for example, like asset lists for your game, or like more in-depth materials for like documentation and stuff like that. But coming up is this tomorrow actually is the midterm review, where you basically, you show off the progress. That's what it is you basically just showing the progress you've made since the start of the semester. And same thing with the final review, is you show the final deliverable. And in your original submission before you get into Magic, you have to describe what your final deliverable will be. So part of the final review is seeing like how close did you get to your final deliverable. So that's what Magic Maker is all about. And something to note with like teams is that Magic actually favors multidisciplinary teams. So like if you're going in with all game dev majors, that they don't like to see that as much as like if you're a game dev major heading the team, and you have like a CAD major for your artist, and you have like an industrial designer for your concepting and stuff like that. Like they want to see different, like more specialized skill sets. So that's the main 3 programs, but there are some other resources that can be helpful. But first, Magic Proposals opened a couple days ago. So if you have a project that you want to get into Magic, go for it. It's open till November 1st. I encourage it if you want. If you're looking for a co-op, if you have a cool personal project, polish it up, make a submission for Magic. So here's the other resources. We have Casual Game Dev, which is like Production Studio, but it's sort of limited on what you can make. And something to note about Production Studio is that it kind of varies by professor, but that's because it's split into Research Studio too, which is also like Production Studio, but more on like experimental gameplay. Like the independent study we talked about, which was run by Ian Schreiber, sort of fell into the format of his Research Studio classes, where we were prototyping experimental gameplay. Also, you can talk to people like me and Kaylee, who are going or have gone through these programs, because we can answer a lot of your questions. Speaking of which, do we have any questions on anything related to any of these programs?
What have you guys made in the Makers program, in the where you actually like make your game for the Magic?
Like our submission, or just like what our projects are?
Yeah, what are your projects? I was just curious what you guys have worked on.
Okay, let's go back to that slide. So, I'm working currently on Personalize, which is a video game. It is a first-person survival horror game where the main mechanic is switching into a third-person perspective for a limited time to sort of use that perspective in ways like that you wouldn't be able to when you're in first person. So think like if a monster's around the corner, you can't see that in first person.
Wait, I think I played your game. Okay, I played your game at the Rock City Game Dev thing. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty early on. We're in the prototype version of the program, and we're currently planning on submitting for the full version in spring. So that's pretty exciting.
I brought Uprooted into the Magic program, and as I said, it was in a rough first day. I got the main component working, which was that the characters switch, and the other one follows, whoever you're not playing as follows. So I got that working, and then I was like, okay, I'm ready to bring on more people to work on the actual fighting with me and come up with enemies and stuff. And then, oh God, my team size was, I think, 5 people back then. And now we're a team of like 9 to 11 people. And a lot of the progress, so I first fleshed out a lot of stuff with my team in the prototype maker program. And then we took that into production studio, and the team also worked with the project through summer and break sprints. So with production studio, and I'm in production studio again, that's the other thing about it. You can take production studio twice and it could still count as like a full class twice, by the way. But yeah, it's just been mainly us hacking away at Uprooted. Our milestone deliverables for our first session of production studio was to polish the controls that we had, add some more enemies, and then we made a tutorial. And then that tutorial is kind of more of a tech test. So in this another round of production studio, we're making a whole new tutorial that's a 2-part tutorial with a boss fight. So we can kind of expand on our game a little bit more with each semester of production studio. And if we wanted to, we could go back to the Maker program and we can get like some temporary funding and push it more.
Funding's a nice thing to hear.
It's a very encouraging program, and it's nice to have people advise you, because I believe Eddie and I now know how to like really run a game company, I would say. Like,
I don't know about running a game company, but definitely like being a producer.
yeah, so you get to see more of the production side of things, especially as a team lead. You'll run a production role, which is everybody's favorite role. But it's very helpful experience. I feel like I could potentially go indie and run the company still out of schools, and that's definitely going to be the case. We're going to want funding in the future, but we're still planning to work on it on our own times after I even graduate.
Yeah. If you end up like being a project lead on a Magic project, prepare to look at a lot of spreadsheets. Actually, for any of these, if you're the team lead, I hope you like spreadsheets. I hope you like Google Sheets or Excel, your spreadsheet poison of choice, because you'll be spending all day, every day, tweaking them, looking at them, color coding them, every single day. A lot of fun. But you'll thank yourself later because they're necessary. Spreadsheets are necessary. Any other questions?
We make our game in Excel.
We
It's
can
possible.
try.
It's possible to make a game in Excel, Julian.
Make an independent study on that. Games in Excel.
Yeah, go study it,
Do it
Julian.
in the Magic Maker, pay $1,000.
Yeah.
To game in Excel.
Yeah, you can. If
You can try.
Make your pitch good enough.
I'll do it.
Julian's gonna make an Excel game. Let's see if he excels. Hi, Eddie. Have the devil on your shoulders.
Any more questions before we kick it over to project sharing? Oh, John, you got a question?
Go off, John.
Yeah, feel free to
Floor's
ask away.
yours.
You can use the chat. You can ask directly.
Yeah, where's the chat? You know the hotkey for the chat?
I thought I did, but Zoom, here we go. Okay. What is a good time to start proposing stuff at Magic? Do you mean like in terms of how far along your project is, or like when the submissions are open? Because submissions are open right now up until November 1st.
And I would say that it depends on your own confidence level with your experience. They are sometimes, you are expected to show kind of a very rough mock-up of your project in your submission. They want to see that you've already made progress on it. It doesn't mean you have to have a whole lot done, but a good amount of progress is helpful, especially for the prototype program.
Also, keep in mind that even if you get in and it's only the prototype program, you can still resubmit for the full version. Like you can do the prototype program once, and then you can do the full version once. So if you get in and it's still a little early on for them to give you the full funding, then that just means you can do Magic twice if you want to. So like it's kind of a win-win scenario if your project's like not that far along, but you still want to get into Magic. Like it's more of a question of like how long do you want to spend at RIT? Because if you're taking a whole year to do your Magic game, like obviously there's more time you're spending here at RIT. Like you're not spending any more on tuition, so I would actually recommend that. But like, you know, it depends on what your needs are. And Eric, you got a question?
Oh yeah. So you mentioned like contract workers and all that. So let's say when I'm like designing a game, I'm not sure about a lot of stuff. Can I wait until like later into development to start like hiring people or grabbing artists and all that stuff?
Yeah, so when I did the prototype program, I actually started solo. My whole prototype was, my very initial prototype before I did the prototype program was done completely solo. And then I decided to bring more people on to help speed up production. Later on, I'd say maybe in week 3 or earlier, maybe I started bringing people on.
Also, yeah, we just got a new concept artist for Personalize like this past week. So you can bring people on at any time. You can do contracts at any time. Like I didn't finalize the contracts for the main team until like a week or 2 ago. Actually, more than that, more like a month ago. We finally got the contract signed.
Aphrodite didn't have any contracts in place until a year after development, which is almost a little too late. Just a little. Hopefully you are working with like really great people who are open-minded, and then it gets easier and a little less stressful to bring contracts up.
But sooner than later is a good thing to do contracts, because then if a problem arises, you have your contracts to refer to. And Carter, you got a question?
Yeah, if Eric is done. All right, cool. So are the submissions only for spring semester? When do summer submissions show up for?
Summer submissions would probably open up near the end of spring semester. I do know Aaron has told us that they plan on doing a summer semester. I'm not super sure when those open. And Aaron is like the guy who runs Magic, basically the Makers program. He's the head of all that.
And production studio, actually.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be able to tell you when those open up, but it would probably be sometime next semester. I don't expect them to open up this semester, unless it would be like near the end. Okay. Any more questions, or else we're gonna go to project sharing. Going once, going twice. It's project sharing time. We will see you over on Discord. Bye-bye.
Hope you enjoyed this one.
Bye.